Okay, good morning, and say happy birthday to the Rebbe Rashab. Today is the 165th birthday of Chof Cheshvan, 20th of Cheshvan. Rebbe Rashab was born 165 years ago in the year Tov Reish Chof Aleph, the equivalent of an 1859, because it was still 1860. I'm sorry, equivalent of 1860. So we're now in the, as I said, 165th year. And to honor that, what better way to celebrate and honor the Rebbe Rashab is by learning his Torah. And of all the Torahs, we're going to begin his classic magnum opus called Hemshech Tofrei Samach Vov, which I'll speak about more momentarily. A Hemshech that he both wrote and delivered, beginning Rosh Hashanah Tofrei Samach Vov, which would be the equivalent of basically September 1905. That is the year Tofrei Samach Vov, Rosh Hashanah, which spanned for 2-3 years that he both delivered and wrote it. And that's what we're going to begin to learn here. So before I get into the actual Hemshech Samach Vov, I want to welcome everyone here, both those that are participating live in the Zoom or on YouTube, as we announced, and those that will be listening to this at your convenience. So I wanted to just do a little housekeeping before I actually begin the learning. So this class that you're right now participating in has been going on now for at least 14 years. It was the centennial of Hemshech Tafresh Ayin Beis, called Hemshech Terav, another Hemshech that the Rebbe Rashab wrote and delivered, a much longer one, that we began to learn at centennial. It was delivered in the year 1912. So in 2012, we began to learn it on a daily basis. It turned into a whole, I guess, movement, if you wish. And we've been learning it literally daily, weekdays, that is, except Shabbos, throughout those years from 2012. Approximately around a month ago, we concluded it after reviewing it many different times. So it was approximately close to 12, 13 years that we've been learning it. So the consensus was to continue with going to Hemshech Samach Vov. And truth is, Tofrei Samach Vov actually was delivered by the Rebbe Rashab earlier, actually 4-6 years before Tofrei Ayin Beis. However, everything's Ashgacha Pratis, so we learned Ayin Beis first in depth. All those classes have been recorded, and they can be found at YouTube, achsidusapply.com. Actually, there's a page in there itself called ayinbeis.com, where you could find there's probably 6,000 classes, I would estimate, plus summaries, and you can find that at ayinbeis.com. Now, we are beginning to learn Hemshech Samach Vov, which, as I said, the Rebbe Rashab delivered a few years earlier. Both these Hemshechim, which I'm going to talk about more in detail, are considered to be, you can call the magnum opuses. I don't know if that's the way you write it, magnum opus or magnum opi. I'm not sure the plural. I don't even know if you can say plural on an author. But bottom line is, these are both fundamental Hemshechim that the Rebbe, when he actually said we're going to publish Ayin Beis, this was Yutas Kislev, in the end of the year 1976, Yutas Kislev Tav Shelamed Zayin, he actually called Samach Vav Neflois, wonders, and Ayin Beis Neflois, even compared to the Neflois of Samach Vav. Wonders even compared to the wonders of Samach Vav. But bottom line is, he called them wonders, which means in Chassidus Chabad itself, these two Hemshechim, Hemshech means the word series. Hemshech literally means a series of discourses. In contrast to one discourse, it's a series of discourses. I've discussed a number of times the history of that. That really began with the Rebbe Marash, was the first one to not just deliver or write one discourse, but delivered a series of discourses, sometimes just 2-3, sometimes 10, 20, sometimes 60, 70. In case of Samach Vav, this series of discourses is actually 61 discourses. Ayin Beis is 141 discourses. And we'll talk again about that more in detail shortly. So that's what we're going to begin to learn. But I want to give a few introductions and a little housekeeping matters. So this class is every morning, every weekday morning, that is 9:30 New York time, Eastern time, till 10:30 approximately. It's live on Zoom and YouTube. All the information can be found at samachvav.com. You can find the Zoom links, the YouTube link. They're both live, but then they're obviously stored, and you can always access them anytime. There'll be a playlist called Samach Vav in the YouTube channel. So if anybody wants to ever go back to listen, or if someone's listening now wants to look back at archives, they'll be slowly accumulating as we teach the class every day. Now, the way I structure the class is more or less that I teach it text-based. We have the actual text. So I have the Sefer here. Now, we've just posted this whole book that I'm learning. If you want to follow and you don't have the book, the Sefer itself, the book itself, just go to samachvav.com, and you'll see there's a full PDF of this entire book. And by page number, you can simply follow along. You can print it out. You can follow it on your phone or on your computer as you see fit. So that is regarding the actual text. Now, the text is in Hebrew. So I'll be obviously reading the Hebrew, translating everything, and then, of course, explaining it. The way we study it is in depth. We don't go quickly. We go slowly, step by step by step. Throughout the class, I pause at different intervals if there are any questions or comments. So if you do have any, please hold them until I pause, because since there are a lot of people that listen to this program, I want to make sure that everybody is covered, so it's not just dealing with one person's questions, but I will pause several times through every class, and you can feel free to ask anything. We also have the opportunity, we've created a WhatsApp group. We just changed the name from Ayin Beis to Samach Vav, so there's a WhatsApp group that you feel free to join. If you want to join that group, you can either chat it here in the Zoom to us, or send a message. Let's see, you could either send it to me directly, or we could send it to Tzvi Lang or Yitzchak Weiner. Whatever you feel, whatever way is easiest, you can send an email to my office at through samachvav.com. Just send an email or a note. I'll be happy to add you, with your phone number, obviously, happy to add you to the WhatsApp group, where we sometimes discuss different topics around Ayin Beis, or we post the link to the current video, or the link to get online, and just a general conversation, all focused around what we're studying. In this case, it would be Samach Vav. For the years we were studying Ayin Beis, of course, it was around Ayin Beis. Okay, so that is some of the technical matters, and again, welcome to everyone. Again, those that are listening here live, those that will participate later. And with that, let me get right into, unless someone has a technical question, feel free to ask. I'm going to get right into an introduction to Hemshech Tofrei Samach Vav of the Rebbe Rashab. But I'll stop for a moment if anybody has any questions. I also ask everyone to be on mute unless you're going to ask something, so that way there's no outside disturbances. But if somebody wants to comment or ask something, I'll be happy to address anything technical. Samach Vav itself, of course, I'm going to address right now. Okay, with that said, I want to dedicate this class to the yahrzeit of Shimon ben David HaKohen. This is the yahrzeit of the grandfather of our dear colleague and friend, Robin Blumenthal. So thank you for that. And this opening of Samach Vav would be dedicated to his soul and to his memory. So let's get into the Hemshech Tofrei Samach Vav, a little background, a little context, including historical context. And before we actually start the learning itself, let me just make sure everything is on mute. Okay. So as I said, the year Tofrei Samach Vav is the equivalent, Rosh Hashanah, that is, Tofrei Samach Vav, is the equivalent of September 1905. That was Rosh Hashanah that year. And the Rebbe Rashab, on that Rosh Hashanah, began this new discourse, this new series, we'll call it Hemshech, which would be known as Hemshech Tofrei Samach Vav, because it's Yom Tov. The full name would be Hemshech Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashanah Tofrei Samach Vav, because that year Rosh Hashanah was Shabbos. So the Hemshech begins, this series begins with the Maimer Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashanah Shechal Liyaz B'Shabbos, which is a statement in the Gemara, in the Mishnah, when Rosh Hashanah comes out on Shabbos. That's the name of the first, which is often the case, that a Maimer or a Hemshech is named after the first Maimer, the opening, very similar to how we name a Parsha in the Torah. Usually the first words of the Parsha, like this week Chayesara, the Parsha is called Chayesara. So the full name is Hemshech Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashanah Tofrei Samach Vav, sometimes briefly called Hemshech Tofrei Samach Vav. In more, I guess, lingo, it's called Hemshech Samach Vav or Samach Vav. Samach Vav being the shortened version of the year 5606 is Tofrei Samach Vav. So 5666. I'm sorry, 5666. So that Rosh Hashanah, the Rebbe Rashab began this Hemshech. It would continue, not necessarily week after week. And you can see this right at the beginning of the Sefer. I'm looking at the actual Mafteah, which is the index, table of contents in the beginning of the Sefer. So it began the second night of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashanah, Leil Beis Rosh Hashanah. And then it went on for 61 discourses, and it would conclude Parsha Ve'era, Tofrei Samaches. So Parsha Ve'era is the second chapter in the book of Exodus, of Shmois, Tofrei Samaches. So that would be already in the year 1908. Basically, the beginning of 1908, or maybe probably the end of 1907. I have to look it up exactly. Vayera is still 1907. So essentially, it lasted for around 2 years, the Hemshech. And as I said, it's not necessarily week after week. There are times the Rebbe Rashab traveled, but all of this is indicated in the actual table of contents, right in the beginning of the Sefer, page 5, which, as I said, you can look it up on the PDF on the samachvav.com. I believe it was also posted on the WhatsApp group, which is now the Samach Vav WhatsApp group. So the Rebbe Rashab began this Hemshech. At the time, and I heard this from eyewitnesses who heard the Hemshech directly from the Rebbe Rashab, the Chassidim that my youth, my teenage years, my yeshiva years, who were there during the Hemshech Samach Vav, not all the weeks, but no one necessarily knew what's going to be unfolding here. But as time passed, and as the Hemshech continued, people began to realize that the Rebbe Rashab was unleashing a completely new, revolutionary, comprehensive blueprint of all of Chassidus. So even though we have already, of course, 4 generations before the Rebbe Rashab, the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek, Rebbe Marash, then comes the Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Chabad Rebbe. Nevertheless, the Rebbe Rashab, as Chassidim called him, the Rambam of Chassidus, was bringing it all together in a much more comprehensive way than ever presented, and much more in depth, going much deeper in analyzing different themes of Chassidus. Now, it's hard to sum up an entire Hemshech in one word. When we learned Ayin Beis, I summed it up based, of course, on studying the whole Ayin Beis, as the theme was interface. Keser is the central theme of Ayin Beis, Keser, the interface between divine and existence. Now, the truth is, all of Chassidus is an interface between divine and existence, and yet, the Hemshech Ayin Beis captures it in a far more focused, fat manner. If I were to sum up Samach Vav, I would say it's the Aveda B'Koyach Atzmei, the power of our efforts and our initiative down below, which he will refer to in the Hemshech later, in the Aveda B'Koyach, what we accomplish through our work. It's basically the critical importance of you and I and our efforts. So though, of course, you can say the whole Torah is that, and definitely Chassidus, but again, Samach Vav dissects it, the anatomy of that in detail. And as we'll learn at length, the whole process of what do we accomplish when a soul comes down to this world. What does it accomplish? Because, of course, that's a foundational question which really drives everything we do. To know the importance of our contribution. What are we accomplishing? God, of course, is complete. And God does not need anyone, does not need anything, and yet He created a world, put us here in this world with a purpose. And that purpose is very much the driving force, the driving engine behind who we are. So this is a very central theme. Obviously, this theme branches off into many other themes, but again, to sum up, to make it a little more like focused, the focal point, you'll see as it develops, this theme comes out in a very powerful way. I want to add one more thing, which can be helpful as well. After we concluded Hemshech Chaim Beis, we discovered, or we knew already beforehand, that the Rebbe Rashab never finished the Hemshech. Samach Vav, he actually completely finished it. He even wrote, didn't deliver, but he wrote an ending to the whole Hemshech, which we'll of course learn at the end. The last discourse is the Rebbe Rashab's Hashlomi. He calls it, I believe he calls it Siyum, or he calls it Hashlomas HaDrush, the end of the Drush, the end of the discourse, the end of the Hemshech. That's the 61st discourse in this Hemshech. But Ayin Beis, the Rebbe Rashab, for whatever reason, never concluded. We could see that from questions and themes that were left unanswered and unfinished. So I wrote up an essay, close to 50-page essay, suggesting what that conclusion would be. In that essay as well, at the end, I discuss a contrast between Samach Vav and Ayin Beis. Being that Tofrei Samach Vav was delivered, as I said, 6 years before Ayin Beis, and of course by the same Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab, it makes sense to say that Ayin Beis is like a continuation where Samach Vav leaves off. So there I discuss a bit more this theme of Samach Vav being Mamata Lamaila, the work, that initiative, Aveda B'Koyach Atzmei, and then Ayin Beis continues where Samach Vav concludes. You can check out that essay as well. We'll post it on the WhatsApp group. We're going to also post it on Ayin Beis because I pretty much finished it. I just added a few points. We'll publicize it today since it's in honor of Chav Cheshvan. But getting back to Samach Vav, after describing the central theme, which again has many, many subplots and sub-themes, as we'll see, I want to address one more thing, which I think is sometimes not emphasized enough when people learn Chassidus. When the Rabbeim said and wrote these Maimorim, it wasn't a random thing that the Rebbe Rashab suddenly started in 1905, Tofrei Samach Vav, to write this Hemshech. You have to look at the events in the world, because remember, the Rabbeim were leaders, world leaders, just like Moshe Rabbeinu in his time. So it wasn't just a leader that was teaching Torah, he also led the Jews out of Mitzrayim. It was a historical time. The Jews left Egypt, the exodus from Egypt, their journey to Sinai, receiving the Torah, the 40 years in the wilderness. So what was going on in the world when the Rebbe Rashab, in general, the Rebbe Rashab's leadership, which spanned from when he became, he was born, as I said, in the year 1860. He became a Rebbe actually quite young, in 1883. He was 22 years old, Tofresh Mem Gimel, after the Rebbe Marash's passing, which I would say 1882, because the Rebbe Rashab's Hastalkus was on Yud Gimel Tishrei, right before Sukkot, and he was a Rebbe till his passing was 1920, when his son, the Frierdiker Rebbe, took over, 1920. So what was going on, especially when Hemshech Samach Vav was being delivered? And when you start realizing the concurrent events in history, it gives fascinating context and perspective on the Rebbe Rashab's contributions and many of the themes that he addresses. Now, he doesn't address historical events. You're not going to find any reference to any events that happened, because he's speaking from the language of Torah and the language of Chassidus. But knowing the events that did happen, you realize interesting, fascinating parallels. So let me mention just a few of those events. That Rosh Hashanah, Tofrei Samach Vav, was literally just 3 days after Albert Einstein wrote his first thesis on the most famous equation in science, E equals mc squared. Basically, that energy and matter are the same and interchangeable, which, if you think about it, is really the essence of the whole Torah, especially Chassidus and especially Samach Vav, that everything is divine energy, and even the material world that we look at with our eyes and we experience with our senses, sight, sounds, taste, touch, and smell, it's just the body, the surface body, of something that is really energy within it. So though Einstein obviously wasn't talking about the divine energy per se, but the very concept and its parallels to Chassidus and themes in Samach Vov are quite striking. That year is also called 1905. They call it the miracle year of Einstein because that's when he presented some of his most important papers, especially the theory of special relativity, which changed the whole course of science, which also includes his analysis, Einstein's that is, of light. This is the first time, well, not the first time, because Max Planck and others before him spoke about it, but Einstein codified it into a system that light, what we call or, light, became such a fundamental force in science. Until that point, light was not really fully appreciated. Where in Samach Vav, as we shall learn, especially in the Maimarim Vayelech Samach Vav, going further from there, you'll see the discussion, or even HaChodesh Samach Vav, a direct discussion on the Chiddush of the Alter Rebbe in what area? Ur. He calls it the Chiddush of the Rebbe Nishmasen, the Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, in the Inyan of Ur. And there again, you'll see tremendous parallels. Obviously, the Rebbe Rashab takes it to another level because it's on the mystical and esoteric and a far more, I'll call it, philosophical and psychological context, whereas in Einstein's theories, it's essentially a scientific idea. Doesn't necessarily apply it to our lives. But when you see the combination and it's happening concurrently, you can't help but wonder what is going on. Now again, I don't have any proof to say the Rebbe Rashab was aware of what Einstein was writing, but there are things happening in the world. We're not always consciously aware, but they're happening. And I'm sure Tzaddik and the Rebbe is quite aware of the vibes that are entering into this world. And that was what was developing on a scientific level. On a political level, 1905 was the beginning of the Russian Revolution. That's called the Bloody Sunday, that October, which was essentially the month of Tishrei again, Tafrei Samach Vav. So though it still be time till the Tsar was overthrown and the Bolshevik Revolution took hold, but the beginnings of revolution were in the air. And that, of course, transformed not only the Russia, but the world. Many people say the Russian Revolution was the beginning of the changes that would come, World War I and later World War II. The world in which we live in is a very different world from the time of 1905, 1906, 1907, when Samach Vov was delivered. And the Rebbe Rashab is writing and delivering this Hemshech during such a dramatic time, which also tells you another thing that was going on were the pogroms. A big pogrom happened, Rachmana litzlan lo yaleinu, in Odessa that year. I think it was also maybe in October, approximately. I'm sorry, I think the Bloody Sunday was not in October. It may have been January that year. But there was that period in time. And there was, I believe, in that period of 1905 through 1909, were like 185 pogroms. That really was the first major immigration that left Russia and came to the United States. Many of the Jews in the United States originate from that first immigration. There was later other immigrations that happened after World War II. But that was all in that period of time. So think about it. A leader, a Rebbe, a leader like the Rebbe Rashab, being fully aware of the events, he had to actually run away from Lubavitch due to World War I. Later, that would be in 1915. But the events in Russia and the upheavals, that was, at the time, the largest Jewish population in the world was in Russia. Today, it's in Israel. Until a few years ago, it was the United States. So the Rebbe Rashab is saying this, delivering Hemshech Samach Vav, and we know that the Torah of a Rebbe impacts the world around it. So there's no doubt that he was either preempting, or like I like to call it, going into the engine room of the cosmos and somewhat trying to help understand and maybe even rewire things, because dramatic revolutionary upheavals were taking place that would affect not just the Jewish world in dramatic ways, but the entire world. And so in a sense, learning Samach Vav is, of course, learning the dynamics and the whole anatomy and the metaphysics of the building blocks of existence with all the different themes it discusses. But that in turn has a direct impact on world events and helps us understand them. And this is not just a speculation. We know a few years earlier, in the year Tafresh Nun Zayin, that would be 9 years earlier, 1897, when the Rebbe Rashab established Yeshiva Temchet Mimim. This was the first time Chabad established a Chabad yeshiva, and he writes clearly that the reason he's established yeshiva, there were many good yeshivas at the time. It wasn't like there was a lack of Torah learning. There were excellent yeshivas in different cities, especially in that area. But he says, because he sees the future coming, that there will be battles to be fought. He says those words. And he speaks about two battles. The battle against God, basically a certain type of godless society, and a battle against Mashiach. And therefore, he wants to establish a yeshiva that would be a training ground for the spiritual war to come. He called it in the year Tafrei Samach Aleph, Simchas Torah, that would be the equivalent again of 1900. The end of 1900, he delivered a talk called Kol HaYetzel L'Melchamas Beis David. All those that go out to wage war in the war of the house of David. And he explained this is the spiritual war. Now at the time, remember the Russian Revolution hadn't happened yet. The World War I hadn't happened. All the events that we know of today in retrospect didn't take place, but the Rebbe Rashab sensed that changes, major changes were taking place. And if you read these talks of his, which I don't want to go into much detail, you could literally see, the prescience, the almost prophecy, you can say. How did he know how the world was going to change? World War I, World War II, that would literally overthrow and completely disrupt Jewish life everywhere, with the Holocaust, God forbid, and so on. And he prepared the ground by establishing the yeshiva. And Samach Vav became one of the major discourses. Who was the main people listening to the Hemshech besides the older Chassidim? Were the students of Temchet Mimim. They were the ones that were there. As a matter of fact, that year on Pesach, when the Rebbe Rashab made the Mashiach Suda, the last day of Pesach is the Suda of Mashiach, Sudas Shel Mashiach. He had all the time, was done in the Zal, in the Beis HaMedrash, with the Bochum and Temchet Mimim, in Lubavitch. And there was when he instituted not just the eating of the meal, but also drinking 4 cups of wine like we do by the Seder. And he made a big fuss about the Talmidim participating in it. In the end of Samach Vav, you'll even find a sikha that the Rebbe delivered, Pesach 1970, where he explains the significance of that Pesach in context of Hemshech's Tafrei Samach Vav. So Samach Vav became a seminal cornerstone in establishing the teachings of Chassidus, especially through the Yeshiva Talmidim, Temchet Mimim, and ever since became a fundamental discourse that is studied in all the yeshivas. It's more advanced studies, so it's usually studied in the higher grades, what we call graduate school in 770, or even the, you could say, post-high school equivalent in the different yeshivas. So Samach Vav becomes part of that essential, well, not just part of, maybe the core cornerstone of these teachings. The Rebbe explains as well that Samach Vav, in all its Giluyim, is a taste of Mashiach's coming. That's why the Rebbe Rashab connected that year with the Suda of Mashiach, and he explains at length how Chassidus is a precursor and an appetizer, a taste of the Torah of Mashiach, and Samach Vav plays a central role in that. If you look in this Sefer, I'm looking at the latest edition of Samach Vav, because there are different editions. So that Sikha is printed, let me see here. Let's see the page, if I can find it here. I believe it's all the way in the back. Not even sure. Let me look at the table of contents. Well, I don't want to take more time than necessary, but let me see what I find. There's Mafteach in Yon. Oh, here we are. Page Tafshin Memtes 749 is a section of a sikha from the last day of Pesach, Tafshin Lamed, where the Rebbe speaks about Samach Vav and its connection to Mashiach. So finally, one more point. In some Sfarim, it says that Samach Vav was also a very difficult year, as I said, pogroms and so on, but it was also considered a ketz. A ketz means a a type of like a opportune time. Ketz literally means the end, like an opportune time for Mashiach to come. Obviously, it didn't happen in the fullest sense of the word. The Gula did not come, but it was a ketz. And as such, it makes sense that the writing and the delivery of Samach Vav fit right into that central theme. One more thing regarding that, keep in mind that Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov that when will he come? When he asked him the question, Rosh Hashanah, Tov Kuv Zayin, he asked the Baal Shem Tov, asked the Mashiach, when are you going to come? And his response was, when your well springs of Chassidus will spread outward. So there you see the connection. And the Rebbe makes this clear in this talk in 1970 that Samach Vav is a central, you can call it a watershed moment in the spreading of Chassidus outward, because it did it in a new, unprecedented way. And that, of course, we'll see in the actual study of the Hemshech. So that's a little introduction to the theme of Samach Vav and some of its central themes that I mentioned, and as well as concurrent events and context, historical context, as well as its role, of course, in the evolution of Jewish history and the changes that to take place. So you really can come away with, when you analyze it, come away with a fascinating insight, not just in the deepest concepts of Chassidus, but also what impact they have and how we can use them and their relevance to the events happening then, and I would say continuing to happen now, because the world in which we live in today is a direct outgrowth of the events then, and you really can't understand the past, the present, and the future if you don't understand the past. So I would submit that studying Samach Vav, and the way we study it is not just studying the text and understanding it, but also applying it to the events in our lives today and the challenges we're facing, even though it's a very different world than 1905. We live now in a very different world. And nevertheless, there are many things in common and many things we can learn from Samach Vav that can be applied both scientifically, politically, historically, and of course, psychologically and emotionally, in personally relevant terms, to come away with a real viable and living and passionate blueprint for life. And that's the real objective of our study of Samach Vav, the way we're going to learn it. And with that, I think I finished my short introduction, relatively short, and I will stop if anybody wants to ask anything. And then we ready to enter into the very core text after giving you this review. Are there any questions anybody would like to ask?
When you started Ayin Base, you put that in context to the Titanic. That was the year of the Titanic. So I was wondering if
afterwards, right?
So I was wondering if which is very fascinating, these contexts of that's called the Year of Miracles for Einstein that you brought up. I was wondering if you can make a connection between the Year of Miracles of Einstein and the world, the pogroms, and the Titanic and Ayin Base, and if how those two relate, those contexts, as well as is there obviously some type of connection between Samach Vav and Ayin Base in relationship to those two contexts?
I have to give it some thoughts. I never thought of it. The connection between Samach Vav and Ayin Beis, I wrote about very directly, and we'll discuss it, how they flow one into the other. But as far as the historical events, look, the upheavals of the time included a major clash. Remember, we're talking now 1905 is also right in the smack in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. I believe those years, the wireless radio was discovered, and as well as other scientific discoveries. And there was also major clash between so-called the old world and the new modern world order, which included very much, you talk about the Titanic, was very much about self-worship, and literally the name Titanic. So the events are all connected, but I don't know if I can make a direct connection between, let's say, the arrogance or the worship of materialism that led to the sinking of the Titanic to events that happened 10 years earlier or 7 years earlier. I don't know if I'm ready to do that. I would just say that the world was going through upheaval, had many different components to it. As I said, the Russian Revolution, I think, is major. The pogroms, of course, for the Jewish world was major. The scientific breakthroughs. And so it was all one part of one period. Remember, from 1905, 1906 to 1912 is only 6 years. So I think you could call that whole period a transition period that would ultimately change the world in many, many ways. And Samach Vav addresses how to change the world in a spiritual way, which is a big point of the point, is looking at all these events. The actual parallels, I will point out some of them when we talk about light later on in Hemshech Samach Vav. I'll definitely discuss the parallels with some of Einstein's revelations and discoveries, as well as in general. But I don't know how much more I can really, I don't want to force it either, to say exactly, Ayin Bey is exactly what happened in 1912, what happened in 1905. I just see it as, remember as well that the Rebbe Rashab said Maimorim and delivered Maimorim through those years. Even after Samach Vav was concluded in 1907, he continued in 1908. There's Tofrei Samach Zayin, Tofrei Samach Ches, Tofrei Samach Tes, Eter is the year 1910. And then he continues till he begins with Ayin Beis. So Chassidus was continuing to be developed through these years. And yeah, the more you learn Chassidus, the more you're empowered with tools to address the changes and transitions in the world around us. Sometimes you see it directly, sometimes it's not so direct. But beyond that, I don't know how much more I want to really, I would have to think about more whether I would have to study a little history as well, how one thing led to the next. Like, did the sinking of Titanic have anything to do with the Russian Revolution? I don't think so. Even though the anti-Semites say everything is you blame on the Jews. Even the sinking of the Titanic. And someone says, how do you say that? He says, Greenberg, Bloomberg, iceberg. So they blame everything on the Jews. If you want to look at it that way, you can connect everything. But I don't really know if I would direct those events. But overall, we're talking about clashes between the matter and spirit, matter and energy, E equals MC squared, and how to deal with the dissonance between material success and spiritual meaning, which of course was a big issue as we entered the 20th century. Because remember, this is the early seeds of the 20th century as well. Okay. Are there any other questions or comments? If not, I'm going to go right into. So another, maybe one or more two technical things. In contrast to Ayin Beis, I should mention, the Rebbe Rashab and Ayin Beis reviewed Hemshech quite a few times when he wrote it. And Samach Vav as well was written, I should have mentioned this before, but I'll mention now. One long flow of writing. If you have the Sefer in front of you, or you want to look it up, if you go to, there's a section called Facsimiles. I'm looking at page 765, Tafshin Samach Hey. Page looks like this. You see the handwriting, the Rebbe Rashab's handwriting. This is actual copy of his manuscript that begins. And you'll see it's just one long flow of writing. Same next page. There's a few pages of these copies. So the way the Rebbe Rashab wrote the Hemshech is very interesting. He didn't write it as single Maimorim. He wrote one, he started Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashanah and began to write and write and write and write. Later, at some stage, it could be close to the time when he delivered it on Shabbos or Yom Tov, he then broke it into Maimorim and he added beginnings and ends. So Samach Vav really, its original manuscript is one long flow that goes for, I don't know how many pages. It's definitely several hundred pages. Then he added beginnings and ends, which is the Dibra HaMaskal, the name of the Maimer, and questions. And then at the end, answers to those questions. And then the Hemshech continues. So essentially, Samach Vav is two stages. One is the original flow, then the additions and the breakdown into Maimorim. And every Maimer begins, V'yesh lahagdim, to understand these, to answer these questions of this particular discourse. Let's go back and continue where we left off in the last Maimer. So when we learn it, we see the final version is actually breakdown of 61 different discourses. But they weren't written initially that way. So we have basically two manuscripts from the Rebbe Rashab. One is the original, then he added his beginnings and ends, and then he gave it to someone to combine both, and such we have what we have, the final version. When it came to Ayin Beis, he added a few more stages. The Rebbe Rashab afterwards, once it was combined, he looked over it again and added more material. He then also added summaries and chapter numbers. We don't have that in Samach Vav. In Samach Vav, it's only complete discourses. It's 61 discourses. It's not one long flow, but we only have 61 discourses. In Ayin Beis, we also have, not the whole Hemshech, probably half of it is broken down also into chapters, in addition to discourses, into chapters with summaries, and then middle of volume 2, that stops, and then it goes back to like the Samach Vav style, only discourses. One more thing, in Ayin Beis, there's a third volume that the Rebbe Rashab never delivered. So it's called the Chelik Shalei Nemar, a part that he never delivered, so it's just one long flow without even discourses. In Samach Vav, it's 61 discourses. So I just wanted to add that that context, to just understand how this was written. Okay. In addition, every mimer was numbered. If you look at page Tovshin Ayin Gimel, again, I'm looking at the back of the new edition, page 773, you'll see the Frierdiker Rebbe listed all the Maimarim. He made a table of contents. He numbered the Maimarim and also wrote a short summary of the beginning of each Maimer. You can see that there, and we'll also review that when we do the studying. Finally, samachvav.com is the landing page we created for this. There you'll also find additional resources, including a running summary in English of the whole 61 discourses, and around, I think, 20, I don't remember how many, close to 30 essays that I wrote on central themes of Samach Vav. This was written a number of years ago, actually written probably 20 years ago, it could be, when the centennial of Samach Vav. But now that we're learning it, that's another additional resource that you can look up. And as we find more materials, we'll include that all in samachvav.com. And with that, I'm going to use the rest of this class to actually begin the Hemshech. So, if you're following along in the actual Sefer, I'm reading now. I'm going to page Aleph. So it's a few pages in because there's a few introductory pages and a table of contents, a picture of the Rebbe Rashab right there. And so page Aleph, again, the pages you can find both in the WhatsApp group, PDF version, or samachvav.com. There's a PDF link. The whole Sefer is there. Just go to page Aleph if you want to follow along. Now, you don't have to follow along the text because I'm going to read it all, translate, explain it all. So it's all self-contained for those that are more comfortable with that. I'm just saying for those that want to follow, you could follow along the text. If you have the Sefer itself, great. So with that, we begin. This starts with the title, starts with a date actually, B'siyata D'Shmaya, with God's help. This mimer was delivered Leil Beis the Rosh Hashanah. The Rabbeim in general, on the first night of Rosh Hashanah, were very quiet. They didn't speak much. And therefore, you don't find that many Maimarim. There are exceptions, I believe, on the first night or day of Rosh Hashanah. But the second night, Leil Beis Rosh Hashanah, is when the Rebbe Rashab began this Hemshech. Remember, he wrote it most likely earlier before he delivered it. We don't know how long before. It could be a week before. It could have been months before. But then he delivered it. So this was actually spoken on the second night of Rosh Hashanah, year Tofrei Samach Vav, the equivalent of 1905. I should also mention that the Rebbe, our Rebbe, was 3 years old at the time because he was born on Tofrei Samach Beis, Yud Aleph Nisan, 1902. So just interesting to note as well, again, for historical context. Being that year Rosh Hashanah was Shabbos, so the mimer begins on the theme of Rosh Hashanah connected to Shabbos. The Rebbe Rashab will ask some questions, and for a few pages we'll go through those initial questions, and then he'll lead us into the very so-called meat, if you wish, the essential theme of Samach Vav. So it's going to be a good few pages until he gets to that, I believe, on page Daled. So the first 3 pages are going to be focused on this theme of Rosh Hashanah and Shabbos. But then, to understand all this, he'll begin at the bottom of page Daled 4. He'll begin to discuss the themes according to Chassidus. So here's how the Maimer begins. But we'll learn it all. Not going to skip anything. So even though this is like what they call the passport, the introduction, we're going to learn it. So here we go. Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashanah Shechali is b'Shabbos. When Rosh Hashanah, this is a Mishnah. In Rosh Hashanah, if you look below, this edition that I'm looking at has footnotes, copious, detailed footnotes, so you can find sources for everything, including previous Maimarim that this Hemshech is based on, this Maimer is based on. We'll look at some of that later. So the Mishnah says, the bottom you see in footnote 2, the beginning of chapter 4 in Rosh Hashanah, Mem Tes Chof Tes Beis 29b, that when Rosh Hashanah comes out on a Shabbos, so several years, during certain schedules, Rosh Hashanah is the first day of Rosh Hashanah is on a Shabbos. But Migdash Hayataken, in the base of Migdash, they sounded the shofar, Avalei b'Medina, but not in the land outside of the Migdash. Medina refers to, of course, everything outside of the Beis HaMikdash, meaning Eretz Yisrael. Umefarish b'Gemara, and the Gemara explains, Hatam, why? If it's Rosh Hashanah, and we know there's a mitzvah of sounding the shofar from Rosh Hashanah, why does that include doing so on Shabbos? Outside of the Beis HaMikdash. So the Tam is Mishum Gzeira de Rabbah. Rabbah made a Gzeira. Rabbah was a sage at the time, and he made a Gzeira, a decree. The Omer Rabbah said, Hakol Chayovim B'Tkiyah Shofar, everybody's responsible in the sounding of the shofar. Meaning we all have a mitzvah to either sound or listen to the shofar. I mean, it's to listen to the shofar, of course. But however, Ve'ein Hakol B'Kiyin B'Tkiyah Shofar. But not everyone's an expert. Since not everyone's an expert, and it's on Shabbos, Gzeira, he made a Gzeira, Shema Yitlenu B'Yodei V'Yelech Eitzel Haboki Lilmeid. So a person who may not be familiar with all the details of Tkiyah Shofar because he's not a Boki, will forget and carry the shofar to an expert to ask him a question, let's say, about the shofar. And in doing so, he will be over on the Isser of carrying on Shabbos. Dalar Amas, meaning you're not allowed to carry anything for more than 4 cubits of Dalar Amas and Rosh Hashanah in public area. So even though there's a mitzvah daraisa of Shofar, Rabbah made a Gzeira, this is a Gzeira de Rabbanon, because not everyone's an expert and people may mistakenly have questions about Shofar and they'll carry the Shofar. So he made a Gzeira that you don't blow Shofar on Shabbos. Ulecheda ain't a mover. The obvious question, of course. Seemingly not understood. You may have heard this question many times in Chassidus. Ma ro chazal laker mitzvasesa daresa. How is it possible? What did they see, Chazal, that they actually uprooted a positive mitzvah in the Torah, mishum chashash gzeira ba'alma, only due to a suffix, to a chashash, to a concern that's possible. V'alo yachshashu lehedyetim. That chashash, that concern is only for hedyetim, meaning for people who are not experts, but kali hadas, and people light of mind, meaning people who may forget that it's Shabbos, etc. But it's not for everyone. There are many people who would never make this mistake. They would never carry a shofar on Shabbos. So because there are some people who may err due to their own, whatever, their matzav, you go ahead and uproot a mitzvah sesa daraisa. It's mamash tiko b'chedesh shofar. It's a mitzvah daraisa to sound and hear the shofar on Shabbos because of this gzeira ba'alma, and the chashash only le'adietim v'kali hadas. Again, the footnotes, he writes that hadietim means she'en yedim dinei tkiyah shofar. people who don't know the laws of shofar. The Kali Hadas, Shelechen Yesh Lachshash Yevira. Kali Hadas means that that they are not they're not concentrating or thinking, and they could be very negligent with Shabbos. So that's he says he brings that from a mimer from the Rebbe that explains the difference between the two. So bottom line is, the question is, how could the Chazal create such a gzeira? The question becomes even stronger. How did they deprive this mitzvah completely from so many tzaddikim g'delim, great tzaddikim v'tevim, great and righteous people? Because by making such a gzeira, the gzeira is not only for Kali Hadas or Hadyatim, it's for everyone. That on Rosh Hashanah till this day, first day Rosh Hashanah, if it's Shabbos, we don't sound the shofar. All because of Akshash, a gzeira overrides a mitzvah says of the Re'usa, and Akshash that's only not for all the Yidden. If it was for all Yidden, you could say, okay, even there you have a question how you could override a written a mitzvah daraisa. But here especially, you're basically saying nobody sounds shofar or listens to shofar on Shabbos. Ubafrat mitzvah shofar she mitzvah rama v'nasa ma'id, and especially shofar, which in mitzvahs itself it's an exalted mitzvah and a very distinguished mitzvah. However you try rama v'nasa ma'id, that's an expression. If you look in the footnotes, that's brought in other Maimorim. He brings the different languages. But bottom line is, it's not just, every mitzvah is, of course, a great mitzvah. But this is a very unique mitzvah, Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year. Ukiyadua, the kol ha-mitzvah shebecheder zeh mitzvahs klolius. It's known, all the mitzvahs of this month of Tishrei are mitzvahs klolius. Because Tishrei is an all-encompassing month, like a Reish. Tishrei is the letters Reishis. And like Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year is like the central nervous system. So it's more than just a specific mitzvah for that day, it's a mitzvah klolius. Like it says in Medrash Rabbah on the pasuk B'chedesh Hashvi, because Tishrei in numbers is the 7th month from Nisan, so the Torah calls it the 7th. So the Medrash says, what does Shvi mean? Shvi comes from the word Shemuzba Bakel, also from the word like V'savota, Muzba. It's sated with everything. Like we say from the word Svia. Muzba Bakel, Sheyesh Beharba mitzvahs. It's a month that has many mitzvahs in it. So Shvi also from that it's sated, it's satiated with many mitzvahs. V'chalukim heima ma mitzvahs d'chol hashana. And it's different and distinguished from the mitzvahs of all year round. Shehein mitzvahs klolius. Because the mitzvahs of Tishrei are all-encompassing mitzvahs. Ubafrat mitzvah shofar, and specifically the mitzvah of shofar, shema'erer umamshich primis v'atzmus erein sof. And specifically the mitzvah of shofar, which awakens, stimulates, and draws down the inner and core of erein sof. Doesn't elaborate on that, but Chassidus talks about that at length, that the shofar was a mitzvah that reached the depths. Like Min HaMeitzer Karasi Kov, Anani B'merchav Kov, reaches the inner and essence of Elokus, of Erein Sof. And what are the Chazal doing? Depriving everyone, including Tzaddikim, from doing this great mitzvah because of Achshash Ba'alma, like he calls it, Achshash Gzeira Ba'alma, which is only for Hadyatim and Kali Hadas. So that's the question. Now this question will not be answered till much later in the Hemshech. I believe, where is it later? It's later in the Hemshech, the answer. But it's an opening question, just like in Ayin Beis. If you remember, he asked questions on B'Shah Shekdimu and actually never answered them. We had to discover the answer through a little investigation work. But here he will answer this question. Okay. Now he's going to continue and explain what exactly is the mitzvah of shofar. Remember, it's a Rosh Hashanah Maimer. As a Rosh Hashanah Maimer, he's also discussing the central theme of Rosh Hashanah. So he's going to talk about what shofar is. But I'll stop if anybody has any questions on what we just learned. think it's pretty straightforward. It's a question on this Mishnah, on this halacha, about why we don't blow shofar on the first day of Rosh Hashanah when it's Shabbos. Are there any points for clarification? Okay. So he continues, V'yadua, it's known, the mitzvah shefer b'kavanosa haruchnius, what is the inner spiritual intention and spirit of the mitzvah of shefer? Hu inyan hatshuva. What is the central meaning of shofar? It's the inyan of tshuva. So shofar is meant to awaken us to tshuva. I don't know if he's going to quote the Rambam, but the Rambam does write it's exeris hakos of shofar, but it does have the remez that, like the call of the shofar, is a wake-up call. A wake-up call to tshuva. V'zeu inyan hatkiya reshena, and that's the meaning of the first tkiya. As soon as we sound the shofar, the first tkiya is a tkiya, a long cry. Shu b'chinas tzaika b'kel poshet. It's essentially a cry with a very seamless. Kel poshet means without any breaks. True and Shvarim both have breaks, short break, longer breaks. But the tkiya is just one long call, one long cry. What is that referring to the Kel poshet? Shazel mitzad yiseiros v'yispaylos pnimi shebenefesh. This is reflecting the awakening and then the stimulation, inner stimulation of the nefesh. Sheba b'izgalus b'Kel poshet dafke. When you speak, for example, you're already using your mind to break down your breath. So it's not just a cry, it's words. It's formulated into words. But when you cry out from the depths of your heart, it's just a simple, shapeless, and seamless cry. That's Kel poshet dafke. When it's coming from Ispilus Pnimi, from Ispilus Pnimi of the Nefesh. The Iniyesh, Bechinis Ispilus Pnimi the Nefesh, Baveda, the Re'usa, the Liba Gamken. Now he's going to compare different forms of emotional expression. There's the idea of Ispilus Pnimi the Nefesh that comes in the Aveda, what's called Re'usa de Liba. Let me explain. Re'usa de Liba is an expression from the Zohar. Re'usa in Aramaic means rotzen. Re'usa is rotzen, will, desire. Re'usa de Liba means desire of the heart. When a person is in a transcendent state, they have a longing. You see people who are they long for something beyond survival, beyond existence. It's a longing. This is not necessarily attributed to shofar. This is a longing that can happen any time of the year, any moment, frankly. So it's an Aveda called Re'usa de Liba. That too is called Ispilus Pnimi, because that's also coming from the innermost recesses of the heart, of the nefesh, I should say. But however, V'hi b'chashoy dafke. But the Aveda of Re'usa de Liba is an emotional expression that comes silent. It's silent. It's not through sound. The Kel poshet of the tkiya is true. It's seamless and shapeless, but it is a sound, as we'll soon learn. Like the service of the priests. When they served in the temple, it was supposed to be all b'chashay with sound. The Levim, the Levites, would sing. They compose songs. So you can serve and experience transcendence through song, through sound, or you can experience it through silence. As a matter of fact, it's not a discussion here, but in some places it talks about which is greater. Because you think sound is more pronounced, more revealed. But sometimes silence is even deeper, because it's coming from such a deep place it can't even make a sound. But bottom line, he's distinguishing between Kel Shefer and the inner call of a soul, but in a silent manner. The kahana be'uvda u'be'usa de liba she b'chashay kiyadua. Let me just see the footnote, how they explain this. Okay, so this is the Zohar. The Zohar that says that the Kohanim, and they served, and Re'usa de Liba is all comparable because they're all done in silence. The footnotes give you sources if you want to look up more details. However, when it comes to Shefer, V'kan, which means we're talking about Shofar now. It's a cry with a sound. It's not silent at all. Like he began at the beginning of the paragraph, that what is this naved? It's tshuva. When a person feels, and remember, tshuva doesn't necessarily mean remorse over sins. Tshuva means returning to your source. Ruach tashav elikim asher nasana. It's the soul connecting and returning to its essential divine source, but it's being done with the sound. That's what Shofar is. Kishneim heim b'bchinas hispailas pnimi denefesh. Next page. Both these hiseres, both these emotional expressions are coming from an inner stimulation from within the soul. Omnam chelukim heima binyanim. Nevertheless, they're different. The Re'usa deliba, desire of the heart, the longing of the heart, that's silent. Sibas spilasi. Now he's going to explain why is one silent and one is one with sound. The cause for the excitement or the stimulation in Re'usa deliba, he mitzad hakiruv. That's because you're feeling close to something. When you feel close to someone, you long to be with them. Since you're sensing a certain transcendent, divine, infinite energy, you long to connect to it. That's how do you reach that level when a person contemplates on the core of Eid Ein Sof, Shemuflo Merumam Be'elamis, which means it's wondrous. It is beyond and completely exalted. The word I'm looking for is removed and transcendent of the worlds. It's not there in a revealed way, but you're sensing it. You sense something, but you're not quite feeling it in a revealed way. Because his neshama is not a keli yet. That this light should enter internally and be integrated. But he does sense it. It's like sensing warmth, but that warmth is not within you, but you sense it. That causes a yearning and a longing to be encompassed in this Eid Ein Sof. So it's like experiencing something that is awesome. That awesome is not yet within you, but you sense it. That kiruv causes the Re'usa deliba, this longing. Kamoshi is boyer. As shall be explained, which will come later, I believe it's in the next mimer. I'm just going to finish this contrast. I don't want to end in the middle of a context. So a few more lines and then I'm going to stop. So the first thing is that it's coming with sad kiruv. And the very rotze itself, the longing itself, in Yonahu b'chinas kiruv masharetzi kolol. So besides the fact it's coming as a result of you feeling close, but not quite having it, so you're longing for it, the very experience of the longing is also one of kiruv. You want to be encompassed within it. You want to become one with it. It's like when you appreciate someone, you love someone dearly, so you want to be connected with them entirely, not just partially. So both the longing is coming as a result of closeness, and the very desire is one to be encompassed, to become even closer. Okay. Mashenkin b'tshuva. Now he's going back to Shofar. When it's coming to tshuva, not Re'usa, we're not talking about this longing that comes from closeness. That's not due to the fact that you're sensing the divine, the awesomeness of the divine. Tshuva comes because you feel distant. You feel lacking something. Not because you feel close and you want to be closer. It's coming from distance. It's coming from a lack of something. He's very distressed. From the fact that he's so distant. V'yesh b'zeh gamkin hergish ha'lakus. He also has a feeling, because if he didn't have a feeling, he wouldn't be longing for anything. So there is a divine feeling here. Ach zeu mashara umar ozvei esavaya. But the feeling is more of the distance, that is painful to him and bitter, that he has forsaken God, or ozvei esavaya. Avaloisha margish ein sof ha'aflo va'ilui. But not that he senses the awesomeness and the magnitude and the magnificence, not the magnificence, I want to call it, I'm looking for the right word, the transcendence of Ein Sof. Umizehu ispilus nafshi. And it's not from that. That is, Ispilus is coming because he senses the awe of the divine. What's affecting him is that he's deeply distressed and deeply shaken up in the depths of his heart from the distance that he's experiencing. Mizeh nasa hispilus. That is what's causing the hispilus, the stimulation. So basically, simply put, summing it up, a person can be aroused in two ways. You know, we're talking about someone who's complacent and apathetic. Obviously, is not experiencing any form of stimulation, not in any way experiencing any longing. But longing can come either because you feel how special something is and you want to get closer to it, or because you feel how distant you are from it, how much you're lacking it. That also wakes you up. That's why you say, for example, in recovery, often it comes down to, I don't want to use the word hitting rock bottom, but you come to a point where you really feel this isn't working. As long as you feel everything is functioning, you convince yourself you don't need to do anything. But you feel a real distance, you feel something's really missing. That's this tshuva. The other approach is you feel something that really impresses you, draws you, because you feel the value of it, as opposed to feeling the distance. It's like people will run sometimes from a burning building. That's the second option. You're running from a burning building. It definitely awakens you because you got to run away from this dangerous situation. Or the first is a far more subtle, is where you feel and appreciate what you're running toward, and therefore you want to get closer to it. So it's very two different ways how a person can be stimulated from their whatever given comfort zone or situation they're in. And one as well is through silence, the other one is through sound. But what? A koil poshet, a seamless and shapeless sound. So I'm going to stop here. As more or less and thank God we entered into, on this Chav Cheshvan, the birthday of the Rebbe Rashab, beginning of Hemshech Samach Vav. Hopefully, God will bless us with the health and the strength and the wisdom to be able to travel through this journey. And I welcome you all again to this journey. And most of all, the personalization of the journey into our own personal lives. Now, what we learned, we could already personalize.
Amen.
Thank you. And we'll continue this tomorrow. This is a daily class again, beginning 9:30 Eastern time. Usually goes to around 9:30, 10:30, maybe a little overtime sometimes. But I will stop, give a few more minutes if anybody wants to ask anything. Obviously, we're just entering into this journey, so just the beginning. And hopefully, I'm going to try to do justice to it. And with that, the floor is anybody wants to ask anything, please.
I have a question about these two types of stimulating the heart, or more specifically, the connection with tshuva, the idea of rechuk and kiruv. Is this essentially the notion of tshuva tata and tshuva ila?
Not necessarily. He didn't say that at all. He just says this. The second one is tshuva. The first one is Re'usa deliba.
Do you understand why I would say that? Because that tshuva tata, I thought, comes from the yearning. Well, anyways.
Yeah, but since the Rebbe Rashab doesn't say it, I'm not going to say it. So I don't necessarily see the need to say that.
Okay. Thank you.
He may say it afterwards. I mean, if he says it later, great. I'm just saying, till now, he hasn't mentioned that. Okay. Are there any other questions?
Is it fair to say that he's trying to say there's two kinds of ways that we one way is we feel a great connection to godliness, and another way is we feel distant. So when we feel distant, we have a yearning. Maybe that's why we don't blow the shofar on Shabbos and other places. It creates even more of a yearning because we
I
feel
don't
even
know.
more.
I'll wait till the Rebbe Rashab answers the question himself. I wouldn't start
Okay,
speculating
got
if
it.
you
I'm
asked me.
I'm skipping ahead, and I apologize.
No, no need to. It's a sign of longing that you're skipping ahead. You could go ahead and look later, but
Yeah.
whether he's going to say that or not, I can't say right now.
Okay.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So again, the best way to celebrate and honor the Rebbe Rashab on his 165th birthday is he comes alive. We're learning his Torah that he delivered so many years ago. We're talking about 1905. Now we're what, in 2025. So we're talking about 120 years ago, actually. This was said exactly 120 years ago, Rosh Hashanah, we should say. Is that right? 1905, 130 years ago? What is it? What is 2025 and 1905? Yeah, 120 years. Okay. Good. So we'll stop here. We continue. And again, anybody wants to join the WhatsApp group, we have a Samach WhatsApp group. Please either post here in the messages in Zoom. Yitzchak Wiener, who I'd love to introduce, is a big active member of this class. We'll be happy to add you. And any other questions you may have, you could pose it to him or to myself or anyone else. Again, welcome all those that are here and those that will listen to this afterwards. Very exciting to embark on this new journey with you. Everyone, I'm going to end the recording now. So we covered the first page